Hello and welcome to episode 27 of the Rollo and Slappy Show. Today is February 20th, 2017. I am Rollo McFloogle and with me is Slappy Jones 2 and we are both at McFloogle.com. The show notes page for this episode is McFloogle.com/27. And one of the links you'll find there is to send Bill Crystal on an Iraqi vacation. I set up a GoFundMe campaign to send him there since he loves war so much, especially in Iraq. And we figured, why not send him there so he can see his handiwork? Well, of course, never take us up on that. So any money that we raise there will be sent to antiwar.com for all the work they do. And if you were thinking about ever donating, now is a great time to do it because they are trying to raise money to run their website. So let's show them our appreciation for the great work they do. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Slap, and he's going to introduce our topic.
Thank you, Rollo. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Today we're going to talk about a question we found on Catholic.com. It's an old thread from 2012, and it provides a long discussion. If you want to check it out, we can link it on our site. But the original question, the title of the post is Catholic Anarchism. And the post says, is being a Catholic anarchist impossible? And the guy says he found a definition somewhere. It kind of seems bizarre. And he writes, I think I'm an anarchist, but I'm willing to give it up if it contradicts Catholic belief. So Rollo and I are both practicing Catholics, also both anarchists. And so my short answer is no, I don't think it's impossible. But Rollo, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. It's not impossible. I think it's very possible. I think that you can arrive at the same conclusions about the government separately, and I think that's kind of the beauty of both things, that you can take two different approaches and arrive at the same answer. So I think it strengthens each of the views, both the view on anarchy and the view on Catholicism and how it relates to government. Because while, typical Catholic teaching is that, like, oh yeah, you should be a good citizen of the government or whatever, but the reality is, if you actually look at the teaching and look at the Gospels, if you are a statist, for lack of a better term, then you're basically worshiping a false god.
So I told you that in the post there's a link to a definition of anarchy. And I just want to read, it's maybe 2 sentences toward the end of this long definition. It says here, and I'd like to know your thoughts, Rollo. The theory of anarchy is against all reason. Apart from the fact it runs counter to some of the most cherished instincts of humanity, as, for instance, family, life, and love of country, it is evident that society without authority could not stand for a moment. Men whose purpose would be to satisfy all their inclinations are by the very fact on the level of the animal creation. That's not anarchy to me.
Yeah, I agree.
And where it says a society without authority, so I've heard it said that in this thread that Catholics cannot be anarchists because there's a hierarchy in the church. What would you say to that, Rob?
Well, I know there's some form. First of all, there's a lot of different forms of anarchy, but when we're talking about anarchy, we're referring to anarcho-capitalism, voluntarism, that kind of thing. Not like anarcho-communism, which, that's, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole talking about that kind of stuff. But we're not against, there's nothing wrong with hierarchy, as long as it's not force. I mean, what's anarchy? Well, we're libertarian anarchists, so libertarianism means that we're against the use of violence against peaceful people. So, the greatest, largest institutionalized form of violence is the state, so yeah, we're going to be against that. But as long as your hierarchy is voluntary and no one's putting a gun to someone's head or coercing them and forcing them in some way to be involved in that hierarchy, it's obviously absolutely permissible. And as far as, taking apart the family, I mean, I've never met a libertarian that said that they're against family. Actually, they normally say that that's the important part of society, and that's how you actually build community in society is through the family, through your neighborhood, through peaceful interactions with people that are fruitful and productive. So, destroying relationships destroys your society. So
I thought that was very interesting that kind of the gist of it is like government is community and government is what brings us together, where I would say it's the exact opposite. If, we'll go to the welfare state, but if you're getting a check from the government, and we can talk about the incentives that does, and we can talk about the theft that goes into it, but you no longer need to rely on each other. If that makes any sense. It's also not real charity. It's forced. I think we would still see plenty of charity. I think we would know our neighbors a lot better without the government than with it, because we would rely on each other for protection and looking out, whereas now we don't really do that. I also think in respect to Catholicism, since this episode is clearly directed toward Catholics,
but it can be applied to Christianity as a whole.
Yeah, Christianity. Yeah, no, totally Christianity. I said Catholics there, but I really do mean Christianity. We could talk about the hierarchical structure of Catholicism and why it's voluntary. I could leave the Catholic Church tomorrow and no one will stop me. I don't even have to pay a $2,000 fee to renounce my Catholicism like you do to leave the state. But we're talking about Christianity. I think there are plenty of Bible verses in the New Testament where Jesus is speaking that would point to him being an anarchist or against the state. Even the big quote where statists love to say why Christians cannot be anarchists because render unto Caesar. I might be putting you on the spot, Rollo, but do you have thoughts on any passages from the New Testament or specifically render unto Caesar?
Yes, I do. And this wasn't a setup, but
what really wasn't. We didn't talk about this before the show. That's why I thought I might be putting you on the spot.
No, it's funny because I was actually just talking to someone about this the other day, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. So the render under Caesar thing, there's a lot that goes into it, and it's frustrated me with like anything in the Bible or any literature or anything that was done hundreds or thousands of years ago. There's certain context to it. So first of all, it's important to understand what was going on when Jesus gave that answer. So the Pharisees hated him. They wanted him dead, or at least, quiet. So they were always trying to figure out ways to get him in trouble with the Romans, because the Romans were the ultimate authority. They were the ones that could execute. The Jews could not execute someone. So they're always trying to figure out ways to get him in trouble. That's why they would come and ask him questions. So they knew they would always try to trap him and say something they could go tattletale him to the Romans on. So they knew what Jesus thought about this kind of stuff. They knew what he thought about Rome and Caesar. So they're trying to get him to say, no, don't pay taxes. You don't know, like that's wrong. That's against what I'm saying. So it was actually very brilliant on Jesus's part to just say, render to Caesar what's Caesar's.
Render to God what is God. Which
right.
Which I think is so. If you just read that quote, it sounds like he's saying, yes, pay your taxes. But if you read the whole chapter there,
like he says, give me what coin are you talking about? Because
exactly.
there were different currencies back then. And
first of all, they're in the temple. Okay. And you're not supposed to have any other gods in the temple. And guess what's on the Roman coins? It's Caesar Augustus, and says, I forget exactly what is inscribed on the coin, but basically says he's a god. So he's pointing out to these Pharisees, whoever was trying to trick him, and basically calling them a hypocrite right there. It was brilliant the way he answered.
Yep. And does anyone actually think that the Pharisees were going up to Jesus and saying like, oh, what do you think about? We actually are curious about your opinion on this. Of course not.
Well, it actually explicitly says that in the passage. It says they tried to trick him.
Right.
And then at the end, they say they walked away in amazement because they couldn't believe he was able to get his way out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you read the whole thing, besides just the render unto Caesar, I think it gives you a lot more context and clearly does not show Jesus endorsing taxes.
Right, because what do we owe? And it's a good point to actually take it literally, is not literally.
The way he said it.
But what do we owe Caesar? Yeah. What do we owe the government?
Well, right. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. I can agree with that.
Right.
Give to Rollo what is Rollo's. Give to Slappy what is Slappy's. Give to you what is yours. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's.
Right. So if you don't owe anyone anything, then don't give them anything. And I think that's generally the point. And the other thing too is to keep it in the gospel. When what is that like? That's the one thing that Jesus said or did that could possibly associate him with saying that he believes there should be a state. Like literally everything else is about peace and nonviolence and loving your neighbor. There's absolutely nothing that would lead you to say like, oh yeah, he actually is supportive of government and everything.
Yeah, there's a couple others I can think of off the top of my head. This is also in Matthew, like render to Caesar, I think is Matthew 22. But maybe it's chapter 5 or 6. It's after the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is talking and kind of going a little deeper on the Beatitudes. And he says, when someone wrongs you or when your brother wrongs you, basically says settle out of court.
Yeah.
He says on your way to the judge, make peace and try to keep things away, because if you get in front of a judge, they will put you in jail and you will stay there until you pay back every penny. I mean, it literally, that's almost, I don't have the passage in front of me, but that's almost a direct quote. He says, settle out of court, because if you go in front of the judge, he will put you in a cage until you pay it all off. He doesn't say, you wronged your brother, so now you must sit in a cage, or it's just to sit in a cage. He actually talks about explicitly saying, don't do that. Settle out, make peace with him on your own. Don't go to the state. I find that one interesting. There's another one with the adulterer where Jesus asks them, what does the law say? And they say to stone the adulterer. And Jesus says, he who is without sin can cast the first stone. So they all leave, and he tells the adulterer, go forth and sin no more. Even though he asks what the law says, and then explicitly tells you to ignore that law.
Right.
How you see him as supporting the state. Now, I know the law is probably the Jewish law, not the Roman law.
Right.
But it's still the theme of doing what is right, not what you're told.
Right. Right. So one of the things that I've written about, this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, I wrote this, but about free will. And if you're a Christian, you believe that God is the source of all life and everything, and your free will. You probably believe that there is something called, a free will, and that it's the gift from God, or at least God is the source of it. So to put the piece in a nutshell, if the source of a gift is the only person or entity who would have any sort of right or authority to change what the gift is or take the gift away. So the state, because it doesn't give us an option in choosing a lot of the stuff, or really anything that it does, it's do it or there'll be some sort of physical harm. So it's forcing you to do it, taking away your free will, ultimately. If you're saying that the state has the authority to do that, but only the source of your free will would have the authority to change it or augment it, then you're saying that the state is God. Slappy, do you have any? Am I correct in?
No, I think you're right on.
That?
And if you want to get even more explicit with what Jesus says, it's also in Matthew after the Beatitudes. He says you cannot serve two masters, only one. And then he talks about the god of Mammon or Mammon. I don't know how to pronounce it. Mammon, which is what they would say was referred to the god of money. Well, who was on the money at that time? I think it's clearly a reference to Caesar.
Although an interesting thing about money and Jesus, do you know or at least the only time I'm aware of that Jesus used violence in the gospel?
Was in the temple, right?
Yep, with the money changers. They were cheating people out of their money. When you went in the temple, you're only supposed to use the Jewish currency. So they had people outside at the front, or in the tent. What was it in kind of like the courtyard or the
before
you can like the first area you go into. And they had people set up that you could exchange your Roman money for the temple money, so you could use it in there. And so they're rigging the scales. And Jesus saw that, and he went in and flipped the tables over apparently, and messed everything up, and said that he called it a den of thieves. So
Right.
when you make people, there's an obvious kind of parallel when you purposefully make people's money lose value. That's theft. Fed. If that wasn't clear
Exactly.
enough.
Yeah. So, anyway.
But why is it? I don't know. Did you have something you...
No, I was going to go back to the serving. You can only serve one master. You cannot serve two. You're going to disappoint one. You're going to hurt one of your masters. And to fellow Christians out there, if you truly do believe in God, do you put God ahead of the state? And who really is your God? Who do you worship more? Who do you obey more? I think that's a question you need to ask yourself. And I think you should read deeper into the Gospels and read what Jesus is saying and apply that to life and to everything else you do, and including to the state.
Right, because there does seem to be a correlation between Christians and patriotism, and that it's like a badge of honor that, like, it's, what's the saying, like, God, family, country.
Right, even in that little piece I read from New Advent that talked about how great it is, love of country, which just seems so arbitrary.
Right.
Why would I put my countrymen ahead of any other human being? We're all individuals, and if you're a Christian, you believe we're all made in God's image and likeness.
And not that
Why
you
would
can't, right? Not that you can't have a preference for where you live or like the
be
people that
proud
are
of where
around
you're
you.
from. I have no problem with that.
But it doesn't make sense if you're on like the border. If you live in Maine and live right on the border with Canada, you're supposed to care more about someone who lives in California,
San Diego,
than the person that lives 2 miles away from you on the other side of the border. I mean, to me, that doesn't make sense.
Right. Completely agree. So anyway, to answer his original question, no, I don't think it's impossible to be a Catholic anarchist. In fact, I think it's preferable. I think it's actually, if you really truly believe what you're reading and what you're supposed to believe, I think it's your only conclusion is to be an anarchist, because we can look at all the horrible things the state does. And remember, it used to be popular to wear those WWJD bracelets, but when you think about almost anything the state does, ask yourself, what would Jesus do? And I don't think it would be massive theft in large quantities and dropping bombs. But I just don't see that.
He would probably starve Yemen, though.
Definitely would starve Yemen. Jesus definitely didn't like anyone who wasn't Christian, right?
Yeah.
Because there were a whole bunch of Christians back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I think that about wraps it up, unless you had something you wanted to...
No, I think that's good enough. I think if anyone disagrees with this, please send us a comment. We'd be happy to push the debate further. But do you have anything on the free market for this week?
I do. So, as you know, as people who are listening to the show, I just about every episode I said, I've been really busy lately with work. So, like when I get mail the last month or two, I've barely been paying attention to it, just kind of sitting off to the side to look at later. And I was getting the mail from, so out where I live, garbage collection is done privately, believe it or not.
Same here.
Oh, really? Good.
Yep.
A lot of people have no concept of that. They never realize that it could be something that could be done by the market, and done very well. So I thought that my subscription was for, indefinite or whatever. Apparently it was only a year long. Or, what happened was the company changed names. I don't know if if the company actually changed or it was just a name change, but I was getting a couple letters from this trash company that I was completely unfamiliar with. So I thought it was just kind of junk mail. They're just they're marketing or advertising. So I just kind of set it aside, ignored it. I finally got a letter I finally sat down and opened the one, and it said, you you haven't paid your past due, and got the second letter being like, all right, you're so past due, we're suspending your service. And that's what they, I wasn't paying them for a service that I had subscribed for. So what they did was they just said, fine, we're not going to give you the product that you're supposed to buy, that you're supposed to receive.
So how'd you resolve it?
I just mailed the payment the other day. So that should set it back in place. But, what they didn't do is they didn't send armed thugs to my door to extract the payment from me. They treated me like a human being, sent me some letters to warn me, said, hey, you haven't paid. Are you sure, you want this service, right? And then when I, didn't send the payment, they just said, all right, well, we're just going to cut you off, which is fair. No, I don't think anyone would expect them to keep servicing me even though I'm not paying them.
Right. Now, another thing I think is interesting about the trash is where I was from originally, it was done by the government. And people would say, or people will make this argument, not so much because there is plenty of private trash pickup, but essentially it's a public good. In a way, we all have trash. We all need to use it. Why not just keep it simple, keep one trash company, everyone pays it. It comes on the same day, everyone puts their trash out, we take care of it. If we didn't do that, what if someone didn't have trash pickup? Well, everyone in my neighborhood either has a trash company or they do something with their trash because there isn't trash piling up in the neighborhood.
Right.
My thought is they all have a trash company and they all pay for it willingly, voluntarily because they want to get rid of their trash. I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, and if you go to maybe an inner city or something where there's people don't take care of their houses and homes and everything, and they're loaded up with trash, I'm pretty sure those are places that have
government trash pickup.
Yeah. So how's that working?
Yeah. So anyway, in conclusion, the market does a pretty good job handling trash.
Yeah, and I appreciate they didn't come and shoot me for not paying my trash bill.
That is nice. You didn't get a 5 a.m. raid.
Yeah, no, not good. You haven't paid your trash bill. We're coming in and because that's kind of what the government does, is that even though it's something silly or stupid that you didn't pay, they come in and like you're armed to the teeth and danger to all of society.
So anyway, to wrap up, I think if you are a Christian, you should be an anarchist. Not only is it permissible, it's what you should be. And the market does a decent job with trash. Yep. I think it does a pretty good job. And it's fairly inexpensive. And I've never had an issue with my trash company. I'm on my second trash company because someone came door to door and had a better price. And I asked what the difference was. And I asked if he's going to come once a week. They said yes. Okay, sure, I'll pay less. So competition keeps the price down. And even though I pay less than I did before, I essentially have the same exact service. I'm happy with it. I'm not going to change unless maybe someone has a better price.
Right. Yeah, and just this should be self-evident, but in case it wasn't, as Slappy said, you should be an anarchist if you're a Christian. If you don't have to be a Christian if you're an anarchist or libertarian, if that wasn't clear.
Sure.
I mean, that should go without saying, but just in case.
I could also say if you're not a Christian, you should be an anarchist too. But since
everyone should, actually, everyone should be an anarchist.
Exactly. But that's what I was getting at, is if you are a Christian, if you believe what Jesus is saying or said in the Bible or what is written in the Bible, if you believe that, your conclusion should be anarchy. And if you don't believe any of it, you should still be an anarchist.
Yep, absolutely. So with that, show notes page is McFloogle.com/24. Be sure to check out the link to the Bill Crystal vacation. Also, like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast and also subscribe to our email list. And follow us on Twitter. All that good stuff. All the links will be there for that. So, thanks for listening. Appreciate it. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Peace.